The Orthodox community, the Jewish community, is realizing exactly that. We need these physical blessings of the Christian community. Standing with Israel, coming on solidarity trips, and Congress going and trying to change laws, blessing the people of Israel with food and with water and with all the basic needs. And I think the Jewish community right now has a deeper appreciation and respect and love. Joel, it's the first time I could say love for the Christian community.
How does an Orthodox Jewish family build a $200 million a year humanitarian relief organization, raising money mostly from Christians to bless Israel's poor and needy and victims of war and terror? This is the story we want to get into tonight. Good evening and welcome to the Rosenberg Report, the only primetime weekly news and analysis show produced by Israelis from Israel on any American television network. So I'm going to talk tonight to Yael Eckstein. She's the president and CEO of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And she's had that position since 2018, but she's not the one that started the organization. Her father did back in 1983. Yael, thank you so much for coming on the Rosenberg Report, especially in the midst of the darkness of this war. It's been so hard, but thank you so much for making time.
It is my honor to be here with you in Jerusalem with the most beautiful background you could have.
And it's really here. We're really here.
We're really in
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
Are like, oh, that's just a green screen. No, it's legit.
That's the Temple Mount. That's the Mount of Olives, exactly. And we can walk there.
And maybe someday you and I, maybe in the not too distant future, will be doing this right in front of a real temple. But
Amen.
For the moment, we're in a different age prophetically. So thank you so much for making time. I want to get into your story. And of course, your story begins with your father's story. But first, let's just recap for people who may not know or who know but don't realize the magnitude of what the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, what they do and how big it has gotten. Let's start there. Annual revenues, annual budget.
All right. Well, we, praise God, are blessed to raise around $200 million a year. And we are the largest philanthropic organization in Israel. We bless and help over 2 million, mostly Jewish people in Israel, Ukraine, around the world, with biblical blessings of food and heating and life-saving. The Bible speaks specifically about what tzedakah is. God tells us exactly where we should be, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to shelter the poor. So we look at the scriptures, we see where is God leading us, and then there are so many Christians and Jews around the world who support our work through prayers and action to be able to save lives on the ground right here in Israel.
And since October 7th, that work has not only grown, but probably changed somewhat. Why don't you talk about what you guys have focused on, because it's not just daily poverty needs, it's also emergency response needs and so forth.
Correct. Well, when my father started the organization, which we're going to talk about soon, it was only for Aliyah. It was right when the Iron Curtain fell, when there were Jews who wanted to get out of Russia and they wanted to come home to their biblical homeland. And it was back then that Jerry Falwell and Pat Boone and Pat Robertson came to my father, a young Orthodox rabbi, and said, we as Christians have a part in this. We want to help the Jewish people come home. So the ministry was only focused at first on Aliyah, bringing Jewish people home from non-Western countries. Then it moved to the area of poverty. Once my father saw that both in Israel and across the former Soviet Union, there was a need for basic food aid. And then it was in 2006, the Second Lebanon War, it was the first war that I ever lived through here in Israel, that suddenly it was the first time that there were rockets raining down on Israeli towns for over 20 days nonstop. And the people in northern Israel didn't have bomb shelters. They weren't prepared with food. And we were getting calls at the Fellowship Jerusalem office saying, we're parents of babies. We don't have formula for them. We're elderly. We don't have food. There's no supermarkets open. The rockets are falling. This was before the Iron Dome.
There's 1 million Israelis were living either underground in whatever bomb shelters there were, or basements, or fleeing south and having to stay either in hotels or with family and friends or strangers. And that, at the time, that was maybe 20% of the population under thousands of missiles.
So that was already now on October 7th. This was the first time during the Second Lebanon War that Israelis were under attack. And that's when we started our security program. And I believe that God gave us the tools then to invest in building shelters and getting ready to operate under emergency for exactly what you're talking about. October 7th, when there were over 150,000 Israelis who had to leave their homes, elderly living in evacuated towns that needed food aid, first responders who were suddenly targeted, who were suddenly killed, taken hostage. The fellowship has our ministry of security that on October 7th, we're already operating on the ground, saving lives as the terrorists were still invading on behalf of millions of Christians around the world. And that, Joel, is what I see as this very stark reminder of light and dark, people who seek death, like the terrorists, and those who cherish and sanctify life. As I was watching the terrorists invade and be in cities like Sderot, where the fellowship has operated for over 20 years, and be in places like Shar HaNegev, where the bulletproof vehicles that we donated just a few months before October 7th were literally saving lives, and seeing people hiding in the shelters that the fellowship has placed, and seeing the terrorists shoot at those shelters that say donated with love from Christians in America, I was sitting there and putting my heart up to God and saying, how much more clear can this fight, this war of good versus evil get? And we're in the middle of it.
We certainly are. I don't think we don't see a clear end at this stage, and what's happening in Lebanon is getting worse. So let's dial back. We'll talk about your story in a moment, but let's start with your father's story. Young modern Orthodox rabbi who starts an organization that really ran counter to almost every Orthodox Jewish instinct at that time. And we'll talk about, it's still not exactly normal today to have that level of connection and fellowship and partnership, let's say, with evangelical and other Christians. So how did your father start that? You mentioned some major evangelical leaders coming to him. Would you tell a little bit of that story, but also he got some blowback from the Jewish community. Let's talk about that as well.
I believe that my father was a man who was sent by God on a mission to change history. And he paid a very, very deeply painful personal price. But he brought us to where we are today, which is, even if there are people who disagree or have issues with Jewish-Christian relations, it's mainstream. It's known, it's accepted. I was with one of the biggest rabbis in Jerusalem 4 days ago, and he was praising the work of the fellowship and saying that we need Christian friends, and Christians are our brothers and sisters who are standing shoulder to shoulder with us right now as the whole world has turned their back.
But that's a shift.
That's a huge shift.
From what? How? Just again, for audience that's just not really familiar with that history, that modern history, recent history.
Right.
Where would the modern Orthodox Jewish community center of gravity, let's say, have been in 1983 when your dad was going down this road?
In 1983, when my father was sent from New York to Chicago to gather support against the Nazi March, many people might remember that Nazi March that was going to take place in Skokie, he was sent to gather support against it. And naturally, he went to the Jewish community, and he realized even though Chicago has a relatively big Jewish community, they're not going to make a difference here as far as stopping this march. And that's when the local Christian community came and said, we stand with you against this. We have made mistakes in the past. Yes, over 70% of Nazis identified as Christian, but they're not Christian. They didn't act Christ-like. We are going to create a new history now, a new future. And we are going to invest everything we have in standing shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish community and with Israel. And it was then that my father realized that God called him for such a time as this. He started what was just a bridge building organization with no financial fundraising goal or objective. He would have roundtables where Christians and Jews would discuss Jewish-Christian relations, but no Jewish person would show up. So it was him and a lot of Christians. And it was then that the Jewish community said, we don't approve of this. We're taking you to the Jewish court to get you to stop. That either you stop working with Christians or you're not part of the Jewish community.
Stop working with the Christian community to stand with Jews, protect Jews, to bless Jews. The Jewish community didn't want that.
They didn't want that. They didn't trust it.
Because
they didn't trust it. Because the only thing that the Jewish community knew about Christians was what they learned in history class and read in history books.
Crusades, Inquisitions, the Holocaust, pogroms, may have had some of those out of order, but that's the history.
And so my father came, though, and said, are we going to be stuck in this darkness forever? Are we going to be a self-inflicting community that just stays in this conflict and in this headspace of we're going to be alone, and then we're going to create the reality of being alone? Are we going to open up our hearts to change and say, maybe God doesn't want us to be alone? Maybe everything that we've learned about the corruption of the Christian church has changed now. Maybe these are people who are actually studying the words of God and listening.
That's a key, and I think it's important for our audience to take a moment and see that, because there's no excuse at all for the history of horrible Christian relations towards Jews. There is sometimes an explanation. It's not an excuse, but when you've got priests who historically would hate a Jew or hate the Jewish community, and the people in the congregation, whatever church background it was, mostly it's Roman Catholic historically, or Orthodox, if they couldn't read,
right,
if they didn't have a Bible, and their priest told them that Jews were terrible,
right,
and Jews killed Jesus, and they should be condemned forever, what else were they going to think, right? Partly the Protestant Reformation, partly the printing press, partly a lot of things built a new movement over the last 400 or 500 years of people reading the Bible for themselves, having a Bible for themselves. It still wasn't enough for everything, but the rise of evangelicalism over the last 200 years, 150 years, really caused people to say, wait a minute. First of all, if you start with Matthew chapter 1, you're reading a Jewish genealogy of Jesus. Jesus was Jewish. Christians were not taught that for 1800 years
grafted onto the rich olive tree of Israel.
Right. So then you get to Romans 9, 10, and 11 about Paul, who himself, an Orthodox rabbi, becoming a follower of Jesus, a Pharisee much less, and then say, no, God has not rejected Jewish people. He loves Jewish people. Now, not all Jewish people believe that Jesus is Messiah, so that's what we have to show unconditional love. He hasn't rejected us. All of these things are in the scriptures, but not every Christian was reading it. Not every pastor or priest was teaching it. And as they did, this created a sea change. One other part, of course, and I'd be curious your take on it, but as Christians saw prophecy being fulfilled, Jews coming back, the rebirth of Israel, the protection of Israel in 48, 56, 67, 73 began to make people think, wait a minute, this is not just God loves the Jewish people, He's with the Jewish people. Something is happening that has not happened for 1900 years. So there has been a sea change, but most of it, I would say, takes us back to the actual teachings of the New Testament. It's not like Christians have changed their teaching.
Right.
It's they've realized that Christian teaching is deeply loving and focused on God's heart for Jewish people. You grew up in a home, much less in an environment, which was trying to be very forward-leaning and saying, I think we should build a relationship with Christians, because, okay, that was the history, but it's not the history now. Right. And when you look at the scriptures, the Jews, the Christians realize now what they may not, and apparently did not realize before. Still, you have the issue of Jesus, right? At the most sensitive point, it's not just the history, it's still the idea that, well, do all people need to believe in Jesus as Messiah? Do Jews need to believe in Jesus as Messiah? And of course, evangelicals absolutely believe this based on the New Testament. That becomes, even if you set aside, right, even if an Orthodox family sets aside all of the past history and say, okay, that's not how Christians are acting now. They're being faithful to their scriptures. But how do we handle that issue that's the most sensitive issue aside from the history, which is, do we want to spend time with a community that wishes, wants, prays for us as Jews to believe in Jesus? Is that a bridge too far? Because that's another element. They're interrelated, history and theology, but still, so not just your father, but you, how do you navigate through that world and communicate to other Jews? We don't have to agree on this, but they still love us. Yeah. But that's, not everybody in the Jewish community feels that way.
Well, I think it's a really complex issue that also is pretty simple.
Okay.
God tells us to love our neighbors like ourselves. What's the definition of a neighbor? The definition of a neighbor is that they're different than me. They have a different culture, they have a different religion, they have different ways of raising their children, they might even make noise at night and bother me. But God says, love them. You have throughout the Christian scriptures of blessing Israel physically the way that they have blessed you spiritually, that Christians are grafted onto the rich olive tree of Israel. What I see, Joel, which is incredible, is that Christians are looking for those Jewish roots that they've lost because of all the corruption that you spoke about throughout the generations.
They were cut off from even understanding the Jewish roots of, of our
Who
own
is
faith.
Jesus?
Yeah.
And they're looking in a way for the Jewish community to say, what's the Sabbath? What's the Sabbath that Jesus spoke? I know so many Christians. The chairman of my board, Bishop Lanier, who has a huge congregation, is a very, very proud Christian, definitely believes in Jesus and the New Testament, is always, engaged in things that bring more glory to God's word. He doesn't eat pork. He hasn't eaten pork for over 40 years. He doesn't eat shellfish. And so I think that there's a connection that Christians are realizing, okay, we can believe what we believe. We should believe what we believe. We are Christians. We should believe in Jesus. And also, the Jewish community has preserved the life of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus through 2,000 years of exile. When the Christian teachings were lost, the Jewish community still preserved that.
That's interesting.
And so I think that it's a dance. Whenever you have two people who don't agree on anything, it could be a marriage, it could be a friendship, it could be countries. What's the blessing of shalom, of peace? You don't need that between people who are exactly the same. God doesn't tell you love your best friend. That's easy. He says love your neighbor. He doesn't say to bless the person who is closest to you who really wants a vacation. No, he says to bless the widow and the orphan, people who you probably don't even have a close connection to. And so I think that in this generation especially, we've awakened to this holy paradox, I would call it, that in many ways, the Christian community needs the Jewish community. That's where so much of these rich teachings are coming from, that they could understand their Christianity in a deeper way. And if it wasn't clear before October 7th, it is definitely clear now.
Is it clear to the Jewish
community needs the Christian community?
So you were talking about the Jews.
It's
Christians
both
need
ways,
the Jews, but yes,
in both ways.
It seems a little early, but maybe you're from your perspective, maybe more of the Jewish community than ever is seeing that, because it's not true across the board. I don't know that that's, unless maybe you think differently. I think there is a growing sense that Jewish people feel more comfortable with Christians. They see unconditional love. Yes, Christians believe in Jesus and they want everybody to believe in Jesus, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be hostile about it or cruel about it, or as people have been in the past. But isn't there still a great sensitivity in the Jewish community?
There's a sensitivity.
And for some,
sensitivity.
I don't want to go there. I don't want to have those relationships. Right. So you remain not alone. I think the Orthodox Jewish community that does want to lean into those relationships is growing, but isn't it still a minority?
I'll go back to the Christian scriptures that say Christians should bless Israel physically because the people of Israel have blessed the Christians spiritually. And I think that's where the relationship is now. You could say it's prophetic.
I do. I'm just wondering how you would describe how much of the Orthodox Jewish community feels this way.
I think the Orthodox community, the Jewish community, is realizing exactly that. We need these physical blessings of the Christian community. Standing with Israel, coming on solidarity trips, and Congress going and trying to change laws, blessing the people of Israel with food and with water and with all the basic needs. That I think that in any relationship, everyone gets what they need out of it. And I think the Jewish community right now has a deeper appreciation and respect and love, Joel. It's the first time I could say love for the Christian community than
It's not
ever
just a
before.
begrudging, okay, I guess we need this help. It's
Not
a sense
even
that
close.
nobody else is with us
No one
as
else
a group.
is with us. These are our brothers
there may be
and
a government
sisters.
here, an ambassador here, a community there, but as 600 million evangelicals, that's pretty much standing with Israel no matter what.
Unreal. I think that I see it personally from the big to the small, from the micro to the macro, meeting with the rabbi in Jerusalem who's saying, your work is holy, we need the Christian friends, may they be blessed. Wow, that is historic. Yeah. To being interviewed in Jewish synagogues and universities because they want to understand Christian love for Israel. All the way down to the Holocaust survivor. I went not too long ago to Sderot, where I brought a food box to a Holocaust survivor. And like I always do, I said, this is from Christians who love you and are thinking about you and praying for you. And she started crying. And I put my hand on her back and I said, what's bringing those tears? And she said, Yael, I was alive during the Holocaust. Nazis who identified as Christian killed my parents. And now the future looks so bright. Now people who are Christians are bringing me a food box. She said, I saw out my window the evil that's in this world, the Hamas terrorists who were murdering people in Sderot. She said, but this brings me so much hope. Christians are standing with Israel. And so I see it everywhere. Is it still a discussion or a debate? Yes. But do we have, I would say, a vast majority of Jews who are appreciating, who are standing with, and who are even reaching their hands back in return to the Christian community? Not even a question.
Last question I want to ask you is, so as an Orthodox Jewish woman, you don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but you have built this very, very warm relationship, and you've come to your own sense of peace, and that this is a mitzvah, this is part of a blessing, holy a commandment, holy work. What's your message to both the Jewish community and to the Christian community as we close this program?
I go back to everything I do to the scriptures. And as you said that, the only thing that was going through my mind was Hine ma tovu manaim shevet achim gam yachad. How good and pleasant it is when brethren dwell together. And I think God has, in unity. I think God has been waiting for this moment. I think he's been waiting for us to take this bold step. What you're doing, Joel, what so many people at TBN are doing, what the people of Israel are doing, what individual Christians around the world are doing. What the Jewish community is doing, what the Christian community is doing. It's not about the disagreements. What God is looking for in messengers is to see the good, not to see the bad, to see the unity, not to see the separation. You see, all of Jesus's teachings are about love, are about giving, are about forgiveness. And so I think that we're sent in this generation right now. It's easy to look at what we disagree on, Jews and Christians. It's very easy. That doesn't take someone who's a warrior. What takes warriors are to come and say, I'm not going to look at what separates us, the 1% maybe of theology and belief, which actually it's a big difference. So we'll be honest about that. But it doesn't mean we can't. And when
love
Messiah
each other and encourage each other and
we'll
support
say,
each
is
other.
this your first or second coming? Okay. When we're standing there and Messiah comes through those gates, we'll say, is this your first or second coming? And we'll work it out then. I think for now, God is calling us to love, 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 and stand in unity.
Thank you, Yael. Thank you for coming on the Rosenberg Report. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you got a sense of who Yael Eckstein is and her heart for building this relationship between Christians and Jews and the important work that the fellowship is doing.